Right, let's just jump straight into this explainer. I want you to think just for a second about a concept we all basically take for granted, the absolute, unquestioning trust we place in our family doctors. You know the image, right? You picture someone highly respected, a real pillar of the community, the exact person you turn to when you're at your absolute most vulnerable. We hand them our health, our deepest secrets, and sometimes even the physical keys to our homes. It's this incredibly comforting illusion of complete safety that is honestly foundational to how our modern society operates.
So, what happens when the person who literally swore an oath to heal you becomes a serial killer? It's a reality that completely shatters everything we think we know about medical safety. Today, we're taking a deep, cinematic dive into a true story that proves the monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they're wearing white coats and carrying a medical bag. Chapter 1: The Angel of Mercy. To really grasp the psychology behind these kinds of crimes, we need to talk about a specific, terrifying criminological term: the Angel of Mercy. Now, this is typically a medical caregiver, like a doctor or a nurse, who actually murders the very people they're trusted to protect. And the scariest part? These individuals strike in the places you think are the safest on Earth. We're talking hospitals, nursing homes, or just your friendly neighborhood clinic. They hide right in plain sight, behind a trusted persona, using their medical access to exert the ultimate control over life and death.
And that brings us to Dr. Harold Shipman. Over the course of more than 2 decades, this British general practitioner is believed to have murdered at least 250 of his own patients. Just let that massive scale sink in for a second. He's recognized as the most prolific serial killer in modern British history. And honestly, the true number of victims might literally never be fully known.
Now, to put Shipman's psychology into perspective, it's really interesting to compare him with another horrific medical serial killer, a German nurse named Niels Hugel. When you put them side by side, a very dark contrast emerges. While Shipman used his status as this beloved community doctor to gain absolute control and quietly end the lives of the elderly, Hugel's motivations were violently different. Operating in chaotic intensive care units, Hugel would intentionally push patients to the absolute brink of death, using unauthorized injections. Why? Simply out of boredom. He had this twisted desire to show off his resuscitation skills to his colleagues. He was convicted of 85 murders, though some estimates suggest up to 300 victims. Both of these men exploited their medical access, for sure, but their psychological drivers, Shipman's quiet control versus Hugel's theatrical hero syndrome, really show how differently that angel of mercy archetype can actually manifest in the real world. Chapter 2: A Doctor's Deadly Method. Let's put on our detective hats for a minute and map out his chilling MO. How on earth does a single doctor get away with this for so long? Well, looking at his timeline, you realize this was a career that absolutely should have been stopped in its tracks way earlier. Shipman's first suspected victim dates all the way back to 1971. In 1975, he was actually caught forging prescriptions for an opioid he was addicted to, and he was fired. But, astonishingly, after a quick stint in rehab, he was allowed right back into practice by 1977, and for the next 20 years, he managed to slip completely through the cracks of the medical establishment. His entire method relied on exploiting the deep, unwavering trust of his most vulnerable victims. I mean, he was the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. He deliberately targeted elderly patients, very often women who lived completely alone. He would endear himself to them with these old-school house calls, becoming so incredibly trusted that they literally gave him spare keys to their front doors. Once he was inside, he'd administer a lethal injection of diamorphine, which is essentially medical-grade heroin. Then, and this is the craziest part, because he was the attending physician, he just forged the death certificate himself, casually citing old age. Chapter 3: One Fatal Tiny Mistake. But here's the thing about predators. Even the most meticulous ones eventually slip up. To really understand the weight of this, we need to step away from the massive statistics and look at a human story. Meet Kathleen Grundy. She was an 81-year-old former mayor of Hyde, a wealthy woman, and by all accounts, in exceptionally good health for her age. On June 24, 1998, Shipman paid her a visit for what was supposed to be just a routine blood test. Well, shortly after he left, she was found dead, fully clothed on her sofa. Naturally, Shipman quickly stepped in and declared she died of old age. But her sudden death immediately raised some massive red flags for her family. So Shipman wasn't just a murderer. He got incredibly greedy. He actually forged a crude new will, totally cutting out Kathleen's family and leaving her entire estate to himself. But big mistake. Kathleen's daughter, Angela, happened to be a lawyer. She instantly spotted the fraud and went straight to the police. When investigators seized Shipman's computer, they found the forged will. He had tried to backdate the document to make it look like it was written before she died, but he completely failed to realize one crucial thing. Computers leave a digital timestamp. The file was demonstrably created after her death. That one tiny, careless technological mistake completely unraveled a 20-year killing spree.
Chapter 4: A Catastrophic Systemic Failure. As investigators pulled at this thread, they realized they weren't just dealing with a monster. They were dealing with a completely broken vault that he just casually walked right through. The UK government launched a massive, historic investigation called the Shipman Inquiry, led by High Court Judge Dame Janet Smith. And her findings? Absolutely damning. The inquiry realized that a single doctor, acting with purely malicious intent, faced absolutely zero friction. He was literally certifying his own murders as natural causes, and the entire system was built to just smile, nod, and take his word for it. Think of it like a high-security bank vault, but the security guards are only checking to see if your ID badge is spelled correctly. They completely ignore the fact that you're walking out carrying bags of cash. That is exactly what happened with the medical referees, the doctors whose whole job was to double-check cremation forms. The inquirers found they totally failed to exercise any actual medical judgment, reducing their vital safeguard role to a mere clerical check. Not once did they question Shipman's entirely fabricated medical histories. The statistics that came out of this inquiry are genuinely grim. Just to put it into perspective, a single medical referee, Dr. Hinchliffe, authorized 176 cremations for Shipman's patients during her tenure. Out of those 176, the inquiry found that Shipman had murdered 107 of them. Because these referees lacked proper training and clear guidance, blind rubber stamping had just become the deadly norm. The entire bureaucracy was just fundamentally broken. I mean, there were absolutely zero independent second opinions required to certify a death in the community. Nobody was tracking the mortality rates, which meant no alarms went off when Shipman's patients were dropping dead at an unprecedented, skyrocketing volume. And when junior staff or local pharmacists did try to raise concerns, they hit a brick wall, a culture of blind deference to the authority of a senior doctor. Adds all of that, his completely unrestricted access to massive stockpiles of lethal controlled drugs, and you basically engineered the perfect ecosystem for a serial killer. Chapter 5: Reforming the Medical System. So how does a society actually recover from a betrayal this deep? Well, the Shipman tragedy forced a permanent, massive shift in the medical system, designed to ensure this literally could never happen again. They brought in strict, independent medical scrutiny for all death certificates. The management of controlled drugs like diamorphine totally locked down with heavy, mandatory audit trails. They built robust new systems so whistleblowers could safely report suspicious behavior without fear. And crucially, doctors are now subject to periodic revalidation, meaning they have to continuously prove they remain fit to practice medicine. One of the most brilliant solutions the inquiry came up with was actually to remove the investigative burden from busy doctors entirely. They proposed creating a totally new specialized role, a trained coroner's investigator. This professional would be entirely independent, specifically trained to scrutinize medical records, hunt for patterns of foul play, and act as a dedicated, uncompromising safeguard between the treating physician and the final death certificate. But, perhaps the most heartbreaking finding of the entire inquiry was this one simple fact. Dame Janet Smith concluded that if an independent official had just sat down and asked the bereaved families a couple of basic questions about how their loved ones died, Shipman's lies would have crumbled instantly. The families would have said, "Wait, but she wasn't even sick," or "He told us he gave her an injection to kickstart her heart." The absolute simplest human conversation was the missing safeguard the whole time. Dame Janet Smith really hit the nail on the head when she summarized the core vulnerability of the medical world. She said, "The present system is almost completely dependent upon the professional integrity and competence of the medical profession. For literally centuries, the system operated on the polite assumption that a doctor would simply never do harm. Shipman proved, horrifyingly, that this assumption can be weaponized." The story of Harold Shipman is like a dark, cinematic thriller played out in real life, but the lessons we take from it are deeply structural. It totally shatters the illusion that authority automatically equals morality. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to really chew on. After seeing the ultimate betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath and the massive systemic loopholes that allowed it to happen, how much blind trust do you still place in the modern medical systems that watch over your life today?